What's up guys, I'm BTC. A new PTR patch just dropped and with it a bunch of bug fixes, but as a result, Hammond is getting a massive nerf to his damage output. We're going to start with Hammond. Over on the PTR, there are some pretty big changes that have made a significant nerf to his damage. Now, these come in the form of bug fixes, but regardless, it still means that he's going to be doing a lot less damage than he has up until this point. And it all revolves around his Piledriver ability. So, how it's supposed to work is wherever you impact with the Piledriver takes the maximum amount of damage. And as you move further away from Hammond, it gets less and less damage. Well, the problem, the first of the bugs, was that if you impacted a player directly, then everyone else in that area would take the full amount of damage anyways. And here's a quick little demonstration. This is the live version of the game right here. As you can see, both of the training bots will take the same amount of damage, even though one is very clearly a little bit further away from where I impacted. Now, over on the PTR, it's been changed, so now that damage will drop off like it's supposed to. There's another change that is a little bit more difficult to show. Basically, whenever you impact onto a surface, but it doesn't actually allow you to stay on that surface, instead it's like an angle or some sort of object or something, Hammond will slide off and he'll impact the ground near it. So you can use this on vehicles or other objects that are kind of like low to the ground, but they're at like a little bit of an angle. So Hammond would hit the first one, deal the damage to everything in the area, then he would slide down and deal the damage to everything else in the area a second time. So you were effectively doing 200 damage to anything that was right underneath you, even though you were only supposed to do 100. That has also been fixed. Here's the problem with all this though. Even with both of those bugs in place on the live version of the game, Hammond's damage output was still too low, and he probably needed a buff even with both of these bugs in place. But now that they've been removed, now that a significant chunk of Hammond's damage has been removed from the game, that means he's going to be way underpowered in terms of damage output. Yes, he's very tanky, but that doesn't really help you. If you can just go in and all you're doing is surviving for a little bit and you're not really impacting anything, then that's not going to be worth using that character. So the reason why Hammond was good was because he could go in and dive, he could deal a decent amount of damage and then get out and still survive. Kinda like what D.Va does, kinda like what Winston does. But now with all of this damage removed, he's just not gonna be good enough to really be used. The character is already a very high skill floor, very high skill ceiling character, so you have to use a lot of skill in order to have him be effective. But when you're removing massive chunks of his damage, it just doesn't seem like it's going to be worth it. But with all of this damage getting removed from him, I think the better choice in most situations is probably just going to end up being using a D.Va or a Winston rather than trying to use Hammond. Which is unfortunate because Hammond is an incredibly fun and effective character once you know how to use him. Unfortunately, most players don't know how to use him right now, but that will come with time. So Blizzard is going to have to compensate for that damage loss in order for Hammond to remain being viable. Now, there's a couple of different ways that they could do this. The first and obvious one would be to just increase the damage of the Piledriver, but I don't think that's really good, because it already does 100 damage to anybody who he directly impacts. So maybe they just need to reduce the amount of damage fall off. Rather than having it start at 100 and then dropping down all the way to 20, maybe it starts at 100 and it drops down only to 50. So it's still going to have that damage drop off the further you are away from the center of the impact point, but it's not going to be as great as it currently is. So that certainly could help it a little bit. But the other way that Hammond could get a little boost to his damage without directly adding to the damage itself would be to simply give him more ammo in his primary attack. So if you were to bump it from 80 up to 100, this would allow him to do more damage, but it's going to require the player to actually be accurate with their attack. But it's not free damage, it's not automatic. You have to land those hits, so there's actually a skill factor involved in it. So if you can land those extra 20 hits, then you do the more damage. But if you're missing, then it's basically the same as before. In any case, Hammond is going to be headed for a pretty bad time when these changes go through and Blizzard doesn't do anything to compensate for it. He already requires a high amount of skill to use, but more than that, it also requires quite a bit of team coordination to use. So if you have a character that's just kind of lackluster, plus it requires a high amount of skill, plus it requires a lot of team coordination to be effective, then why bother using the character is kind of the point that I'm getting to right here. Because these changes are in the form of a bug fix, I wouldn't be surprised if you see them go through to the live version of the game in the next week or so. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see more, subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss anything. Also, come hang out in my Discord server and my Twitch live stream. Special thanks to my Patreon supporters. If you'd like to see what kind of cool VIP rewards you can get, check the links down below. And remember, always blame the controller, because it's never your fault.